Hello Tower Gaming players, this is Evan Jarvis, also known as Gripst, and welcome to part 4 of my multi-table tournament guide. In this section we're going to look at how to adjust your play once the bubble is burst and you're in the money. It's very important to take notice of who is playing to move up the pay structure, who is playing to win, and who has gone completely psycho because they're now guaranteed a payday of some sort and feel like they have nothing to lose. Your goal will remain the same: playing to win, and hopefully finding a way to those top 3 spots where the big money is. In the late stages, you have to be much more careful than you were in the beginning. But if everything is executed correctly and your timing is on, you can accumulate a very big stack going into the final table, giving yourself the best chance at winning. I've said it numerous times throughout this series, and I'll say it again: you must be paying close attention to how everyone at the table is playing so you can capitalize on their mistakes. If you're mindlessly just clicking away, you'll often find yourself making aggressive plays against players who only play good hands, 3-betting maniacs and getting re-raised, and just picking bad spots to steal in general. By paying good attention, you can identify where the soft spots are and who is playing too loose and therefore are good candidates to play back at. So, pay close attention and try to take note of the following: who is playing very few hands and not doing a lot of re-raising, who is raising a ton of pots, who's 3-betting a lot, who is reshoving actively when they have under 25 big blinds versus letting themselves get blinded away and simply playing tight when they have this stack size, and finally, who is capable of coming back over the top of people with a 4-bet after they've been 3-bet. Once you've done this correctly, you'll be able to make profitable adjustments that will help you have perfect timing. So, how do we adjust to what we know about our table and our opponents? Before I get into these strategies, I want to stress that you must have the proper stack sizes to be making each play. If you have under 20 big blinds, you can't really be opening to steal. If you have less than 35 big blinds, you can't really 3-bet light with the intention of folding to a re-raise. And if you have under 50 big blinds, you shouldn't be 4-betting anyone light. As long as you have more than the minimum required big blinds, feel free to use all the following techniques at any time a profitable opportunity presents itself. If all the players left to act in the hand are playing very tight, you want to be opening a lot of hands. Pretty much anything playable. This includes ace-9 and better, any pairs, any suited connectors, any connector 7, 8 and up, any Broadway cards. While in deep stack poker, this can get you into trouble. The fact is, if your opponents are playing tight in a tournament, your actual hand value has very little impact on how the hand will play out. Most of the time, everyone will fold, since they're only playing like 10% of their hands, and you will win the blinds. If they do decide to call you, you'll still be able to take down the pot a lot with a c-bet, since they'll be missing a lot of boards. Tournaments, unlike cash games, are a flop game. The fact that we have an ace or Broadway cards in our hand simply helps our case in that it's less likely our opponents have a playable hand, and being able to make top pair is very valuable in tournaments. If one of the tight guys does call your flop bet though, it's time to shut down. These guys aren't putting a lot of chips in without a monster, and if they've called the flop bet, they probably aren't planning on folding for the rest of the hand. Be willing to give up and move on. All your pre-flop and flop steals will already be showing you a nice profit, allowing you to chip up without a big all-in confrontation. It's very important to note that if someone has a reshove stack of 12 to 24 big blinds and they know how to use it, meaning they're re-raising all in a lot over the top of loose openers, it's very bad to try stealing from them. This is why it's important to note who is using their reshove stack as a reshove stack and who is simply playing tight. If it's a weak player with this stack size, you should still be attacking them relentlessly, since they will only play back with the top 10 to 15% of hands, and the math is way in your favor in terms of what you're going to win when it works versus what you lose when they wake up with a hand and play back at your steal attempt. Once you've identified someone who is using the first strategy I just covered, it's time for you to counter that strategy. Someone who is opening a lot of pots hoping to steal the blinds isn't looking to play big pots. They're looking to chip up with low variance. So if someone is opening a lot of pots, what do? Re-raise. This is also known as 3-betting. Like the first strategy, our hand value isn't that important when we 3-bet. In fact, it's even less important than when we are trying to steal. We're following the same strategy that we will 3-bet hoping to take it down, and if we get called, we'll fire a continuation bet and stop there. The best hands to have for 3-betting are ones that have an ace in them, since it decreases our opponent's chances of holding an ace by 50%. Broadways are fine as well for the same reason. And as you get deeper stacked, over 40 big blinds, where it's more likely the villain will flat call our 3-bet, being suited and disguised becomes very important because flopping flush draws allows us to play our hands very aggressively post-flop, and if we do happen to hit a monster, the villain will never be able to put us on 5-7 suited or whatever we have. But the fact that our opponent opens a lot of pots is not grounds to 3-bet him whenever we feel like it. There are two considerations that must be met for it to be a good spot to re-raise. First, the opponent must be loose and opening a lot of pots. And second, the big blind has to be a weak tight or short stacked player of under 12 big blinds. This is because if the player has 15 to 20 big blinds, they're going to be reshoving a lot, and any smart player knows you don't try to steal from someone who's going to be moving in on you a lot. The weak players give up their blinds easily, which makes for a quote-unquote good spot to steal. So if you see someone who steals, trying to steal in a good spot, pop in a re-raise of 2.2 to 2.5 times their bet, and you'll be amazed at how often it works. Don't fret if you run into a hand and get 4-bet. If it works the second time around when you 3-bet, you've already made your money back plus interest. Hearing this strategy, you should realize why it's very important to be selective about your steal attempts. If you have players still left to act who like to 3-bet, you should be more selective and cautious about your steal attempts. This especially holds true if the 3-bet happy player has the button, because the button is by far the loose aggressive player's favorite spot to re-raise from. Now we're going to get on to a very tough concept, which is dealing with the maniacs. These guys are going to be not only stealing a ton, but they'll be 3-betting your opens, and when you 3-bet them, there's a very good chance they'll come over the top with a 4-bet, as long as they have enough big blinds. Against these players, I would advocate only 3-betting them if you're prepared to call an all-in re-raise. I'm not saying that you need to have ace-king to re-raise these guys, but if you're going to be 3-betting ace-queen, ace-jack suited, or even pocket sevens, you'd better be ready to call an all-in from them. It's very difficult dealing with the maniacs because they can wake up with hands too. Generally, if there's a maniac who has position on me, I'm looking to open a lot tighter so that when they do 3-bet me, there's a better chance I'm going to have a strong enough hand to move in over the top of them with a 4-bet. For those of you just starting out, just be a lot more careful when a maniac is in the mix. It's totally okay to sit back on the sidelines and wait for him to knock himself out of the tournament and then get back to work. In almost every tournament, there will be some good players left when you make it to the money, and they all know the things that I'm teaching you in this video series. They're going to be stealing a lot, re-raising you a lot, putting you into tough spots. And against these guys, you have to have some balls and be ready to play back at them without the absolute nuts. If you open in a good spot with a reasonable hand, like a pair or a good ace, and they 3-bet, you've got to be willing to gamble and ship the chips in. Remember that once you're in the money, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain, so it really pays to gamble. Building on this topic, if you know someone is playing to win and will shove late position with a wide range of hands, you have to be willing to make the call with small pairs, medium aces, and good broadways for the following reasons. First, you'll be getting good pot odds with the blinds and antes that are in the pot. Second, you'll be ahead of them a good amount of the time. And third, even when you're behind, it's rare that you'll have less than a 40% chance of winning. You'll have to gamble a lot, and you'll have to run good to go deep in tournaments, that's a fact. But if you're taking smart gambles, you'll find yourself going deep more than most of your counterparts. The key is that you can't be afraid to gamble. You have to be willing to get your chips in there and go for a big stack. Amir Vahidi once said, "In order to live, you must be willing to die." And that is the tournament adage that holds true no matter how much the game evolves. If you make it to the final table bubble, you've already done extremely well. At this point, the final table is in sight. A lot of players are looking at how much money they could potentially make from each jump. At this point, you pretty much want to lose your mind and just be the craziest player out there. Every strategy I just discussed is now tenfold because fear and fold equity are at an all-time high for your opponents. It's very common for players to double their stacks on the final table bubble without seeing a single showdown because everyone's playing so scared. Again, you must play based on your stack size, but whatever weapons you have in your arsenal, you want to be using them to the max at this stage of the game. If there's another maniac, you might have to go to war, but if you feel it's a good spot, you shouldn't pass up on it, because remember, the big money is in the top 3, and tournament pros are judged by how well they seal the deal, how many wins and top 3 finishes they get. It's not about how many final tables you make. I've talked a lot about being crazy and going nuts on people, which is very important, but that doesn't mean blindly gambling. All your decisions to make moves should have sound reasoning behind them, and when you're getting all in, you either want a ton of fold equity or at least a 60% edge when the cards are turned over. You want to mostly be picking on the stacks that are smaller than you and avoiding the other big stacks unless you have a huge edge. Big stacks should, for the most part, stay out of each other's way, and as long as you have a big stack, you want to protect it. So let's go over how we make sure to keep our late stage strategies within reasons and how we can be a good closer. First, we aren't looking to straight up gamble anymore. 50-50 is not a part of our vocabulary once we're this close to the big money. Let's look at some examples of where, however, we would want to gamble. If it's folded to the small blind and he shoves 8 big blinds, and we're in the big blind with an ace, king jack, a pair of 3s or better, against anyone who's not super tight, we would want to call because we're beating a lot of the hands he's moving in with. Another example would be we open the button and the big blind who has 15 big blinds reshoves. We have ace 9 or better, pocket 7s or better, or king queen. Again, we would call since he is probably reshoving with any pair, any ace, any suited connector, and any 2 face cards, which we dominate with the hands I just mentioned. A third example, the hijack opens, the cutoff 3 bets, and they both have 40 big blinds, and we have pocket jacks or ace king. We should reshove all in and hope to either pick up the dead money, get it in against ace queen or a smaller pair, or win the flip. The last example is close to a coin toss, but we also have a lot of things going for us in terms of other ways we can win the pot. And if your opponents are playing very tight, then we don't want to be calling them without premium hands in these spots. That's an adjustment you'll have to make by watching your table and seeing who's playing loose and who's playing tight. Our goal with a big stack, or any stack for that matter, is to pick up chips without showdown, so less variance. Don't attack people who you know are capable of making moves on you. Stick to well-calculated spots that show a good expectation and a lot of chance of getting called or re-raised. This strategy is one that we've gone over, so let me remind you once more who are good candidates to steal from. First, people who are only playing about 10% of their hands or less. Second, people who don't make calls when they are getting 2-to-1 odds on their money, typically after opening and getting re-raised all in. And C, people who have less than 12 big blinds. Policing the thieves is also a strategy that I feel we've covered pretty well. What we're looking for is people who are playing 20% of their hands or more, and who are stealing from those good steal candidates I just mentioned. The ideal stack size to re-steal from is someone who has 25 to 34 big blinds. Since they can't really 4-bet us light, they don't have enough chips, but they will also be opening to steal a lot because this is a good stack size for stealing. If someone has 20 big blinds or less, generally you shouldn't try to re-raise them without a good hand. At this stack size, people don't often fold after raising. If they're opening a pot, they're usually planning to go with the hand. So try not to re-steal from these guys unless you've already seen them raise and fold with this amount of big blinds or less. Again, this is something I can't stress enough. While all these moves are really cool and fun, you have to make sure to not overdo it with them. Some of your opponents will also be paying attention, and if they see that you're getting out of line, they're going to come back over the top of you. The best thing that can happen to us in a tournament is for people to allow us to run them over and never fight back. As long as you're being reasonable with how often you make plays, You should be able to stay under the radar and avoid getting messed with every time you attempt to play. Think about how many hands you have opened in the last 20, how many times you've 3-bet, and if these numbers are low, then it's time to find a spot to make a play. If, however, you've opened 6 times in the last 20 hands and 3-bet twice, you might want to chill out for a couple of orbits so you don't raise too many eyebrows. The payout structure has a big effect on how your opponents are going to play. Once you get deep, a good move is to open up officialpokerrankings.com, where membership is free. This site will tell you what buy-in tournaments this player normally plays, whether they play high volume or just recreationally, how well they do, pretty much everything you need to know. The general rule is, if someone is in off a satellite, the money will be very meaningful for them, and moving up even one spot means a lot. If someone is a casual player who doesn't play very often, they also probably care a lot about the money and moving up the pay structure. If the player you search plays a ton of tournaments and is clearly a professional tournament grinder, they're only looking at one spot, and that's first place. These guys will have no fear, and thus you'll have to be very careful about picking your spots against them. What you need to realize as an aspiring or astute tournament player is that the money jumps don't matter much, and you simply just need to do your best to be a good closer. Keep your eyes on the prize, focus on making it to the final table with a big stack so that you'll ensure yourself the best chance at winning. Now let's go over briefly how to work various stack sizes when you reach the final table bubble. If you have a big stack, every weapon is in your arsenal, and you should be playing in 5th gear against everyone but the other big stacks. Steal a ton from the shorties, re-steal from the medium stacks, and don't be afraid to give someone the big old 4-bet with a medium strength hand if you think they're trying to keep you in line. Once the opponents realize that you have no fear and that their steal attempts to play back at you will just end up with them being put in a tough spot, they'll probably stay out of your way and let you do whatever you please until the final table bubble bursts. As a medium stack, it should be pretty apparent what your goals are. You want to focus on the small stacks and the tight players, but avoid the big stacks and crazy players. As long as you can have more than the same stack size of 20 to 40 big blinds going into the final table, everything's fine. If you can get there with more, wonderful. Your goal at this point is not to get a double up and enter the final table as the chip leader. Your goal is simply to pick up the scraps when the other big stacks pass up on a good opportunity to steal some chips. The last thing you want to do is let yourself blind down such that you enter the final table as a short stack. You have to maintain your activity so that you still have a fighting chance when you get to the final table. Don't go overboard, since the big stacks can put you in your place, but don't pass up on what you feel are very good opportunities to get chips, even if it means pushing the stack all in. I mean, really, it's the bubble. How often do you think someone's going to call your all in without a premium hand this close to the final table? As a short stack, you have to really go for it at this point. Sneaking into the final table and going out 9th or 10th isn't worth much more than going out in 11th place. Since everyone else is playing tight, you're going to have to be shoving all in a lot to pick up the dead money that's out there. Reshove on the guys who are stealing a lot, because you know that as long as you have more than 20% of their stack, they're going to have to be careful about calling you. What you want to avoid is moving all in on people whom your stack only represents 5 to 10% of theirs. Since you can't hurt them very much, they're going to be calling your shoves pretty light. And it is of the utmost importance to avoid getting called light when trying to work the short stack. Definitely have no fear though. People are not going to want to call you, and you should be able to pick up a ton of chips and get to the final table with a nice medium-sized stack. And if you run into a cooler, it's no big deal. You still always have a 20% chance minimum to suck out, and if you don't, there's always another tournament. One thing to note about the final table bubble is that it's the one time in the tournament where play starts to get shorthanded. Instead of playing with 9 or 10 players at the table, you're going to find yourself playing with between 5 and 7 players. This means hand values go up. In a 10-handed game, we're looking to get hands like pocket 9s or better and ace-queen to get involved. In a 5-handed game, on the other hand, pretty much anything that looks good becomes playable. To get a good idea of what you should play, pretend that the first 5 seats in a 10-handed game have folded, and now you're first to act. So you're basically starting on the cutoff of a 10-handed table. With only 4 players to get through, the following hands are all very playable with an average stack. Ace-9 offsuit plus, any suited ace, king-queen, 7-8 suited and better, pocket 2s and better. If you have a big stack, you can open any connector, suited or unsuited, any 2 cards over 10, and pretty much any ace. Just be careful when you get called, because flopping 2-pair with ace-deuce doesn't make it an automatic stack off just because you're shorthanded. You want to be opening a lot more hands to steal a lot more and take advantage of the fact you have a big stack, but you don't want to go overboard post-flop and just punt it away. For the short stacks, if you have 12 big blinds or under, here are what hands you should be shoving in the various positions. If you are in first or second to act, shove with any pair, ace-10 or better, ace-8 suited or better, king-queen, and 7-8 suited or better. If you're on the button, you can shove any pair, any ace, any 2 face cards, and any suited connector. If you're in the small blind, you can shove any pair, any ace, any king, any suited queen, queen-7 offsuit or better, jack-7 suited or better, any suited connector, and any connector. And the shorter your stack becomes, the wider you want to be pushing. If it gets to the point where you have 5 big blinds and you're in the small blind and it folds to you, you're going to want to move in with any 2 cards, because that represents a nice chip up of 20% if the big blind folds. These shoves are not mandatory, but I just wanted to give you a general idea of how much gambling you should be doing. If the players behind you are super tight, you can shove much more hands. But if they're super loose and they're doing a lot of calling, then there's a better chase and there's a better place you can get chips from. It's totally fine to pass up on these all-in plays. At this point of the tournament, you should have a good feel for how everyone plays, and your poker instincts will really be what takes over. Only you know all the dynamics of what's going on, and therefore there's nobody better than yourself to make the decisions at this stage of the tournament. My guide is only that, a guide, not the strict rule. The more poker you play, the better your instinct will be, and I can say from personal experience that the best thing you can do in poker is trust your gut. So keep playing, keep practicing, and you'll find yourself at the final table in no time. This has been Evan Jarvis for Tower Gaming. See you at the top.